Welcome to Unchurched with Pastor Todd. I'm Todd Candelon, and I am glad to be back. We just finished our series exploring the book of 1 Peter, Joyful Misfits. Hope that you enjoyed that. It was a little weird for me because I shot a lot of that series well in advance with me and my man Devo so that I could cross the Atlantic Ocean. So while you've been watching me here week after week, I have been sailing across the Atlantic, which is really cool, really fun. I'm sure some of those stories will work their way into the sermons in this series, but it's cool to be back in my natural habitat. I was a little nervous this week as I got ready to come back into the pulpit. You always feel after you've been off for a while that maybe you have lost your touch. I don't know how long this series is going to run. It'll probably be a good long time because with what he said, what we're going to do is examine basically the words of Jesus as they appear in the three synoptic gospels. If you're familiar with the New Testament at all, you know that there are four gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are considered the synoptic gospels because they are the most similar. John is kind of its own thing. I love the Gospel of John, and there are some of you loyal viewers to whom I owe the completion of a series in the Gospel of John. I had just started a series in the Gospel of John when I was dismissed from my last job, and so I would like to come back to that and finish the Gospel of John. So I'll probably do that, Lord willing, probably in 2023. I'll finish this series, and then we'll do something else, and then probably the series after that, we'll see. But for now, we're going to focus on Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Mark will have the primacy in terms of my research because most Bible scholars agree that the Gospel of Mark was the first one written, and most scholars agree that it's, almost a sure thing, call it extremely likely that the writers of Matthew and Luke both referenced the Gospel of Mark. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to reference whichever book happens to be the most poignant when it comes to the passage that we are exploring that week. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way through basically the chronology, if you will, of the Gospels, but I'm not going to hit everything that Jesus says. The conceit for this series, what he said, is that I'm just going to focus on the words of Jesus. I'm not going to focus on any of the other stuff in the Gospels, literally only what Jesus said. The idea came to me while I was on night watch in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Here you are, first story from the trip. I always had the night watch midnight to 3 a.m. And so, you'd have tasks to do, but much of the time I'd be laying out in the front cockpit. I was on a really big catamaran, big 60-footer, 35, 40 feet wide, lots of space. And there's a forward cockpit kind of in front of the cabin. And I would lay out there in the middle of the night, and the stars were just really unbelievable. And one night in the middle of the ocean, which was pretty cool, like being literally in the middle of nowhere, the thought just came to me, because I've been wondering what I should do next as we kind of enter into a new year and move past 6 months of doing this together. What should I do next? And the thought just came to me, what he said: why don't you focus on the words of Jesus? Now, I need to give a little shout out here to my dear friend, Kat Gray. Hi, Kat, love you, and Scotty and the kids. Kat and Scott Gray were members of the church we planted in Toronto, 2001 to 2006. That church is still thriving to this day, but we planted it and pastored it for the first 5 years of its life, called Free Church. If you are in Toronto looking for a great church, I think it's freechurch.ca is their website, but they were members there. And I remember a conversation with Kat after church one Sunday night where she was kind of wrestling with me a little bit over some of the content in a sermon I had just preached. And she was challenging me in terms of focusing on what Jesus said. I think I was preaching from Paul. I forget which, might have been in Corinthians. And there was a little bit of push-pull in terms of how much weight we'd put on what Paul said versus how much weight we'd put on what Jesus said. And at the time, I wasn't having it at all. But as I find myself at this stage of my life, in this chapter of my ministry career, I've been really wanting to do everything I can to try and strip away as much of the ancillary garbage that so often attaches itself to Christian practice, and to really zone in on what Jesus himself had to say. And so what he said will focus exclusively on the words of Jesus. Now, back to how I might pick the focal point. So for example, in the Gospel of Luke, the first words Jesus says are the first recorded words that Jesus says are when he's a little boy and his family's come down to the temple and they've left him behind. Maybe you remember the story, maybe you've never heard the story, but he gets left behind in Jerusalem and the family is on their way back to Nazareth and they realize, oh my gosh, where's Jesus? And they come back in a tizzy to Jerusalem and they find him and he says to them, they find him in the temple debating with scholars in the temple. And they're like, where were you? Why did you do this to us? And Jesus looks, I think, at his mom and says, why, didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? Now that won't preach, right? Like there's not really much to preach on there. So I'm not necessarily going to hit every single word that Jesus says, but I'm going to hit every single poignant thing that Jesus says. So for example, by the time we get to the Sermon on the Mount, also known as the Beatitudes, I may have to spend several weeks preaching us through the Sermon on the Mount, because so much of, well, literally everything he says, this is the blessed are the poor, blessed are the, etc., blessed are the, that is his most famous sermon. So I don't even know, it may take me 3 months to preach through the Sermon on the Mount, but that's what's fun about this context. I can do whatever I want to do, and if you like it, you can stay, and if you don't, that's fine. But I'm just going to focus on what Jesus said, what he said, and then there'll be the additional hook, what he said about. So what I'm going to do is when I get to a specific passage, I'm going to do everything I can to kind of zone in on the key theme that he was dealing with there. And that's what I will make the sermon about. So, for example, today's sermon, the first one in this series, what he said, is what he said about temptation. And you'll see why in just a second when we come to the text. But on that note, what text am I going to be working from? This is the Woost translation, and I got to give a shout out here to my buddy Chris Jones. What's up, buddy? Love you, man. Appreciate you. He's the one who introduced me to this version. It's a really cool version. It's trying to get as close to the original intent of the original Greek as possible. Just read you a little bit about it. Unlike other versions of the New Testament, this expanded translation by Kenneth Woost uses as many English words as are necessary to bring out the full richness, force, and clarity of the original Greek text. Neither a paraphrase nor an interpretation, this unique translation, based on the earliest and most accurate Greek texts, brings new meaning to the language and message of the New Testament for today's readers. So some of the things it does is it captures the style of the original writings. It brings out the full meaning of each Greek word. It structures sentences according to the Greek word order, placing the emphases where the original writers put them. It clarifies distinctions between Greek synonyms that are often simply rendered in other translations by the same English word. And it arranges the text into coherent paragraphs to help us kind of make sense of the logical flow of the text. So the Woost translation is what I'm working from, so it's as close to the original as possible. So I hope you like it. You may want to go get your own copy. You can find a link online. Devin will put it there for you, the Woost translation of the New Testament. So that is the one I am working from. So my goal with what he said is to help me and you reimagine Christianity based on what Jesus actually said and didn't say about life, God, and the meaning of everything. So I recognize it's a bit of a tall order, but that's what we're going to do. I don't know how long it's going to take, but that is our task. So for today, what he said about temptation. And our first passage is found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, and we're going to take a look at the first 14 verses. And Jesus, in the control of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was continually being led by the Spirit in the uninhabited region, for 40 days, being continually put to the test by the devil, as he solicited him to sin. And he ate not even one thing during those days, and they having been brought to an end, he became hungry. Then the devil said to him, in view of the fact that you are the Son of God by virtue of your possession of the divine essence, speak to this stone to the effect that it will become a loaf of bread. And Jesus answered him, it has been written, and is now on record, the individual person shall not live on bread alone. And taking him up, he exposed to his eyes all the kingdoms of the Roman Empire in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, to you I will give this authority, all of it, and its glory, because to me it has been given and is now in my possession, and to whomever I desire I give it. As for you, therefore, if you will fall upon your knees before me and touch the ground with your forehead as an expression of profound and reverential worship, all shall be yours. And Jesus answering said to him, it has been written, and is at present on record, you shall worship the Lord your God, and to him only you shall render sacred service. And he brought him into Jerusalem and stood him upon the wing of the temple and said to him, in view of the fact that you are Son of God by virtue of your participation in the divine essence, hurl yourself down from this place, for it has been written, and at present is on record, to his angels he shall give a charge concerning you to carefully guard you, and also in their hands they shall lift you up and carry you, lest at any time you strike your foot against a stone. And Jesus, answering, said to him, it has been said, and is at present on record, you shall not put the Lord your God to an all-out test. And having completed every test and solicitation to sin, the devil stood off from him until a more propitious time. Cool, right? You like the Voos translation? I really, really like it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on just 3 verses from what I just read to you, verse 4, verse 8, and verse 12, to see what he had to say about temptation. So let's define the terms off the top. Temptation, from the word tempting. Tempting, having an appeal. Enticing. It's from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. For me, I would define temptation this way. Temptation is an itch you're having a hard time not scratching. You're welcome. It's Pastor Todd's translation. I like that one. That's my interpretation of the word temptation. An itch that you are having a hard time not scratching. So if that's you, if you have struggled with something for a long time and you haven't yet figured out how to beat it, hopefully today's exploration of what Jesus had to say about temptation will help you find some freedom. Temptation, an itch you're having a hard time not scratching. So Jesus said 5 things here that jumped out to me about temptation. Now let me say a couple things here. I'm going to do everything I can to be as free as possible. I'm coming out of many years of being a company man, many years of constantly being worried what people are going to say about what I say, and really worried about being judged for what I say in the pulpit. And so I'm going to do everything I can to walk into freedom. I'm a bit of a wounded animal. It's taking me a while to do that because I'm so used to fearing the lash, and so used to kind of measuring my words. So I'm going to do everything I can to be as free and honest as possible. And I want to invite you to keep this goal in mind. Like, I am trying to redefine Christianity for myself based on what Jesus said. And along the way, if I can help you do the same, well, then maybe together, as we awaken into this newfound realization of what Christianity actually is, we might be able to make the world a better place. But I don't expect you to agree with me on everything that I'm saying, and I'm not trying to make you believe everything I believe at all. So that's why I say there are 5 things here that jumped out to me. Maybe not all these 5 things will jump out to you. That's okay. Maybe watch these with a pen, and if there's something that speaks to you, write it down. I have found over the course of my ministry career that there's almost never a sermon where there's not at least one moment that speaks to each person in the room. Now, of course, there's nobody here in the room but me and Devo, but there are thousands of you watching online. So I hope that for at least some of you, what we're about to explore here resonates in potentially a life-changing way. So 5 things that jumped out to me from what Jesus had to say about temptation. First thing, it has been written and is now on record. So that's Luke 4, verse 4. It has been written and is now on record. He's appealing here to the authority of the Jewish scriptures. Okay, it's important to point that out. This is an appeal to authority. So Jesus himself, according to his own words, sees the Jewish scriptures as authoritative. Now, he was a Jew. He would have been raised in the Jewish context. And for him and for his original audience, the Jewish scriptures, what many today refer to as the Old Testament, they would have been the final authority, and Jesus is making an appeal to that authority. Now, here's where this gets a little bit difficult for us. We live not only in a postmodern world, but in a postmodern world. Postmodernity was kind of coming on the scene maybe even before I was born, but it was really en vogue when I was a young man and in high school and then in university. And of course, now my kids are in high school and university, and I think we are several generations past the blooming of postmodernity in our culture. But the ongoing legacy of postmodernity is that there is no such thing as authority anymore. But in a twisted way, in the absence of a prescribed authority structure, what have we done as people? Well, we have, into that vacuum, right? If we have said, well, there's no more authority anymore, nobody can tell me what to think or believe. Well, in the absence of that, we have filled that vacuum with another authority. The only thing is now we are the highest authority. If you don't believe me, all you got to do is spend some time scrolling around YouTube, spend some time on TikTok, spend some time on Snapchat, spend some time on Instagram, and you will see person after person after person after person after person who is utterly convinced of the rightness of their perspective, and nobody can teach them any different because they are the final authority. So I don't want you to get your knickers in a knot when I say this is an appeal to authority, because everyone appeals to some kind of authority. Simply put, these days, most people appeal to themselves as the ultimate authority. And it seems to me that's why so many people's lives are so screwed up. If your life is anything like mine, you're not very good at organizing your life. You're not very good at eliminating trouble from your life. You're not very good at making sure that nothing but goodness comes your way. You're not a very good God. Neither am I. But many of us, most of us, in fact, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say all of us, to some degree, live as if we are the gods of our own lives. We are in final authority. If you want to deal with temptation here, you need to figure out who's in authority besides you. Because if you're struggling to defeat temptation in your life, you just can't do it, well, obviously you're not a good enough authority. You need to appeal to a different one. It has been written and is now on record. If you want to deal with temptation, you need to figure out who's in authority besides you. Second thing you need to do here is to get in touch with the Numinous. I get this as we continue, still in verse 4. The individual person shall not live on bread alone. In the classic translations, it says, man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. It's interesting that follow-up is not present in the original. The individual person shall not live on bread alone. What's Jesus doing here? Jesus here, at the simplest level, I think, is rejecting an entirely materialistic worldview. There's more to life than food. It's basically what he's saying. The devil's tempting him. He hasn't eaten in 40 days. Jesus hasn't eaten in 40 days. Devil's tempting him to use his divine prerogative to turn a rock into a loaf of bread. Jesus looks at the devil, says, listen, there's more to life than food. Okay, the individual person shall not live on bread alone. So I wanted to just sit with this for a minute and have us consider whether or not we, in fact, live as if there is more to life than what we can taste, touch, see, hear, and smell. Do you believe that there is more to life than what can be experienced in the material world? Do you believe in the Numinous? What is the Numinous? Here's the definition of Numinous from Merriam-Webster. Numinous, filled with a sense of the presence of the holy, or the presence of the divine. Have you ever experienced a holy moment? There were lots of those for me on the Atlantic crossing, sitting under that canopy of stars. The sunsets were just unbelievable. But even some of my partners on that crossing, we had great conversations when you're sailing with 5 other people for 30 days, every day, the same thing, in the middle of the ocean with nothing to do but mind the boat, feed yourself, and try to find as much shade as you can. We had a lot of great conversations, and on that boat, I was the only non-atheist. I was the only one who believed in the Numinous. My friend Danny, the captain of the boat, actually said to me straight up, he's like, I don't believe in the supernatural. Kind of just hit me like a ton of bricks. I have spent much of my life surrounded by people who are like-minded. It was very good for me to kind of be reinserted into the real world in a sense, and to come face to face with a wonderful, generous, beautiful, admirable guy who absolutely does not believe in the Numinous. So I want to just ask you how you feel about that. Do you believe in the Numinous? Do you believe in the supernatural? Do you believe that there is more to life than the material world? Think about your reaction to love. Have you ever had a love relationship? Remember what that did to you? Remember your reaction the first time you fell in love? I talked about the sunsets on board. Let's talk about sex. Remember the first time you had sex and how just utterly mind-blowingly life-altering that was, and what a huge aspect of a healthy life sexual relationships are. Your reaction to love, your reaction to a sunset, your reaction to sex. How about one of the outworkings of sex? Your reaction to the first time you had a newborn baby in your life. The smell of that child, the feel of that child in your arms. The feeling you had the first time they smiled at you. As that baby grew into a toddler, they began to converse with you. How about your reaction to a profound piece of art? It's one of the lingering casualties of pandemic life. We haven't been to concerts in so long. Art galleries, museums. Think about that time that you came face to face with an epic piece of art and your reaction to it. Speaking of epic, how about a phenomenal meal? You ever had a meal that is so good it's a spiritual experience? Is your reaction to all these things just the outworking of brain chemistry, or is there something more at work? This is a really crucial question. Some people, some of you, might think that it's just brain chemistry. When I meet somebody who is convinced that there is no such thing as the numinous, we generally have to change the subject. Because for me, an awareness of the supernatural is so bedrock to my life and so defines who I am and what I do and how I do it and why I do it, that it's literally like I'm from another planet. Where are you at with this? If you want to deal with temptation, and again, if you're taking any of your cues from the words of Jesus, you're going to have to get in touch with the numinous, because he clearly believes that there's more to life than material things. He also believes that you need to put your worship in the right place. We're in verse 8 now. Listen to what he says about worship. You shall worship Yahweh, the Lord your God. Okay, so he's a Jew. When he would say God, he would say Yahweh or Adonai, because they wouldn't pronounce the proper name of God, but the Lord your God is code for Yahweh. You shall worship the Lord your God, you shall worship Yahweh, and to him only you shall render sacred service. So worship in the Greek means to bow the knee and kiss. The word is proskuneo. It basically means to ascribe worth, which is why in English we came up with the word worship, from worthship, to ascribe worth to something. Worship. And to him only you shall render sacred service. The devil wanted Jesus to worship him. Jesus says, no. The Bible says you shall worship Yahweh only. And to him only you shall render sacred service. What does sacred mean? Do you believe in the sacred? I think we live in a culture that to a large degree has disassociated itself from sacred things. Sacred from the dictionary means this: devoted exclusively to one service or use. What's sacred in your life? I think if you dig a little, you'll see that there are many things that you have made sacred because you have devoted yourself to them, but they may not actually be sacred things, which is why you're caught in a loop that you can't escape from. My friend Gord Marriage was the first one I ever heard say this. I don't know if this saying is original with him. It might not be. But if it is, hey man, props to you, G-Money. Everybody worships. It's only a question of who or what. That's not a boom moment right there, right? Everybody worships, including you. It's a question of who or what. Who do you worship? I think there's a very good chance that you worship you. I know that this is a tendency of mine. You got to work against it constantly. Maybe wrestle with that a little bit this week. Who do you worship? Or put it another way, what is your life devoted to? I've said this before, I think it's worth repeating. Look at your schedule, and you'll see who your God is. How you spend your time is a very strong indication of who or what you worship. You need to deal with these questions if you're going to deal with temptation. You're also going to have to learn to submit. This is what Jesus says. You shall not put the Lord your God to an all-out test. So this is after the third temptation now. Devil takes him up to the pinnacle of the temple, says, throw yourself off. Doesn't the Bible say that he will give his angels charge over you? Catch you up, they won't let you hurt yourself. What does he say? You shall not put the Lord your God to an all-out test. I just want to point out that the implication here is that the Bible is telling us what to do and what not to do. Okay, the scriptures say, you shall not. Okay, Jesus here is issuing a command. The scriptures here are issuing a command. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to ask you, how you doing with that whole submission to authority thing? And like, touche, preacher, right? I'm infamous for saying I got no problem with authority as long as I'm in it. Okay, so I know firsthand, I am not good at submitting to authority. You should see me try to work my way through an airport these days. Gosh, the trip home was just ridiculous. Lineup after lineup after lineup, and official after official after official bossing us around, telling us where to go, telling us where to stand, refusing to answer our questions. I'm getting angry now just talking about it. Okay, so touche, I know that this is difficult because I do not like submitting to anybody. So how am I with the whole submission to authority thing? Not good. How are you with the whole submission to authority thing? Because if we take what Jesus says seriously, we need to take seriously the fact that we're going to be told what to do and what not to do. Someone's going to issue a command, and we need to submit. I think a lot of people stay stuck in destructive patterns because they just won't submit to the good advice they're receiving from their therapist, from their spouse, from their friends. Yeah, you should really stop. What do they know? You shall not. You shall not what? Fifth point here. You shall not put Yahweh, the Lord your God, to an all-out test. Here's what I think he's saying here. In your bottom line moments, who do you trust? You shall not put the Lord your God to an all-out test. So when you find yourself in a bottom line, rubber meets the road, kind of end of the road moment, where are you going to put your trust? Who do you trust? Are you going to trust God, or are you going to trust yourself? I don't know about you, but I'm not that trustworthy. We mentioned this before. Like, I'm just not that good at building a perfect life for myself, my wife, and my kids. I'm just not. Despite my very best efforts, my life continues to be difficult. You know, if one of you's figured it out, please let me know. I'd love to read your thoughts on the matter. But I think this is getting at a default here that we all have, where we just kind of default to trusting ourselves. When we get right to the end of it, we're like, if push comes to shove, we have this reaction, well, if I can't trust myself, then, all right, God, you better come through now. This tendency to put God to the test. When you find yourself in trouble, you're going to help yourself, or you're going to ask for help. See, there's a difference between putting God to the test, demanding that God do something to meet your needs, and asking to simply ask for help. Not to put yourself in a situation where you're making demands, but to come to God with a posture of humility and to ask for help. So if you are struggling with temptation, I want to ask you this question. Who do you trust? Is there anybody in your life that you trust? Ask them for help. So you may not be all the way there yet in terms of your relation to the Numinous, right? You might be like, I'm not even sure if God exists. That's fine. That's okay. I'm glad you're here. So just take the next step today. Think of one person in your life that you trust and ask them for help. Figure out your authority. Get in touch with the Numinous. Figure out who or what your life is actually devoted to. Learn to submit. Learn to trust. That's what Jesus had to say about temptation. And next week, we'll change our mindset.